Dementia. That word can bring up fear, loss, and anxiety, all very valid and real emotions. But what if we flipped the script and focused on living well with dementia? Wow, what a difference that could make. Stay tuned to learn more. Welcome to Aging Unscripted, a podcast with a different perspective on aging. Here we explore a wide range of topics aimed at celebrating, supporting, exploring, and honoring the aging journey. I'm Jill Vitale-Aussem, and I am privileged to serve as the president and CEO of Christian Living Communities, a nonprofit senior living and services organization based in Denver, Colorado. And in the studio with me today is Pam Sullivan, our Vice President of Communications and Philanthropy. And we are both so excited. Pam and I are so excited to have two very, very special guests joining us all the way from Canada today. And we're going to be talking about why we should focus on living well with dementia. So our two special guests today, we have Mary Beth Wighton. And Mary Beth is really a pioneer in dementia advocacy. And she's also an author. She wrote a book called Dignity and Dementia, Carpe Diem, My Journals of Living with Dementia. Mary Beth received her diagnosis in 2012, and she is recognized for helping to shape Canadian dementia policies and human rights. We also have Jessica Luh Kim, and Jessica is an internationally recognized dementia educator and consultant committed to transforming the culture of aging and supporting those living with dementia. Jessica has served with many culture change organizations and engaged with leaders globally to change the narrative and the focus on helping people live well. And both of these amazing women have worked with Christian Living Communities and continue to do with supporting our communities and the residents and families.
And our team loved working with both Mary Beth and Jessica. And Mary Beth, I am just so taken by the title of your book, Carpe Diem. Wow, that's a strong word. Tell me a little bit more about your journey and why you selected Carpe Diem to really represent your approach to living well with dementia.
Well, thanks for that. Carpe Diem actually comes from a painting that my niece had done herself, and she put the word Carpe Diem on it and gave it to me just after I was diagnosed. And I didn't recognize what it meant, so I said, what does Carpe Diem mean? And she said, it's Latin. And what it means is to go out and seize the day, because you never know what tomorrow may bring. And it just, it was like a watershed moment. It was such a great saying that not just me, but my whole family has adopted that. And so we continue to actually remind each other to live and stay focused on today. I was diagnosed in 2012, and everything was negative. I was told to go home, get your affairs in order, you're going to die, and you're going to be a burden to people. But I was so fortunate because it was just after that diagnosis that I met Jessica and Lisa Luh. And they said to me, you can live well with dementia. And they taught me that. And it was interesting because that was the only positive thing that was actually said to me.
Wow. That's that must have been heartbreaking. And I assume as you were talking with your family and your friends, how did you get them to really get it, that this is the approach you were going to take and that you were going to go for living well with dementia? What was that like?
Well, I think, when you start to put positive things in front of you and start to slide that negative narrative, out of the way, then really what happens is everything in your life starts to change. And so when you're putting positive energy and positive thoughts and having positive relationships that really embrace life, and you can live the very best. And I do live the very best life.
That's wonderful, Mary Beth. Thank you for sharing that. That I think is a powerful message that hearing it directly from you really gives hope and light to people who have received a diagnosis.
Yeah, it's a different approach. And yes, it's not normally what we hear. And I can imagine, and I hear that from you, Mary Beth, what a positive impact that's had on your life, just that change in mind shift about it.
Yeah.
And Jessica, so At the Christian Living Communities, we work very closely with the Eden Alternative and have for many, many years. And we'll put a link in the show notes to learn more about the Eden Alternative. But, when you came out and talked with our team, you talked a lot about the Eden Alternative domains of well-being and how focusing on that can really support a life worth living and living well with dementia. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. First, let's take a step back and recognize the fact that every single one of us wants to live well, regardless if we have dementia or not, right? And as Dr. Bill Thomas, the co-founder of the Eden Alternative, once said, well-being is elusive, highly subjective, and the most valuable of all human possessions. When I've had the chance to ask people living with dementia what they need to live well, and Mary Beth and I have had tons of conversations around this, what people living with dementia have told me aligns with the Eden Alternative's 7 domains of well-being. And so the first domain is identity, being well known, recognizing that there are so many different identities that shape us, and we have a history. The second domain is connect.
Can we real quick, Jessica, I have a question about that. Mary Beth,
Sure.
when you got your diagnosis, did you see your identity did you see others shift your identity from Mary Beth, the wonderful person you were, to Mary Beth, the person with dementia?
Yeah, it shifted almost immediately. In fact, as soon as it came out, then doctors started to not look at me anymore. Was speaking to my partner. I was told I was a very successful person in the business world and athletic world, and and all of a sudden I couldn't do anything anymore. Everyone was saying I couldn't do anything anymore. So yeah, it had a huge impact.
And losing that identity, Mary, just so hard. So, Jessica, I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but it just really struck me how that is one of the first things that is stripped away from somebody living well with dementia, and how we as a society need to not do that.
Right.
Stop doing that.
Absolutely. I think the other thing is connectedness. Too many people living with dementia have told me soon after a diagnosis, and when people have learned that they have dementia, they start pulling away. And so connectedness is something that we need to keep in mind, because we are all biologically hardwired to want to connect. We need to have relationships with people, our community, with time, place, and nature. And that's really important to support our well-being.
Jessica, jump in real quick on that too. Sorry, instead of thinking about, Richard Taylor, who, of course, a lot of people know who Richard Taylor was. He was a very fierce dementia advocate. And I remember a video of him saying, people would say to me after I got a diagnosis, well, I don't know what to say to you. He said, say hello, right? So anyway, sorry again to interrupt you on that, but that connectedness really is so important.
No, I'm so glad you mentioned Richard Taylor, because he was one of the greatest teachers for many of us. In fact, Mary Beth and I were just meeting with Christine, who is a person living with dementia who lives in BC, Canada. And she also said it was so good for us to connect because relationships are really key to living well. Yeah. I was going to say security. Security is really important. Oftentimes when we think of security, we think of physical security, but really we need to start thinking about psychological safety and being free from fear, being free from doubt, feeling valued and respected. Because when all of that happens, we feel more confident to navigate the world around us. The fourth domain I just want to highlight is autonomy. Again, this is often stripped away for people living with dementia. They have and should have the freedom to choose, make life choices and have agency over their life. And meaning. In fact, Mary Beth and I often talk about meaning. We all need purpose. I often make a bad joke. Oh yeah, coffee can only get you so far, right, in the morning. I mean, all of us want something that's going to help fill our sense of purpose. We all want to be connected to something deeply rewarding and significant. And so meaning is very integral to well-being.
Hey, Jess, can I just jump in for a quick sec?
Yeah,
I think a really important one is important, the truly important things that you're connected to, not just superficial things. It makes a huge difference.
Like sometimes you see people manufacturing a sense of purpose versus with something that's really deeply meaningful to each person. Yeah, absolutely.
Huge difference.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
And growth, I think too often times we assume people living with dementia can't learn new things, don't want to learn new things, but we are, again, biologically hardwired to want to grow and develop even in later life. So we need to honor and recognize that. And then joy. Who doesn't want to experience joy? We all want to experience pleasure, contentment, and happiness. So those are some of the domains of well-being that we need to keep top of mind. And then back to your, go ahead.
I was just going to say the 7 domains really hit for every person, right? Yeah. These are things that every person needs to live well. Not just those people. It's not just about people living with dementia. It's making sure what we all need to live well continues for people living with dementia, that it's not stripped away or dropped because of a diagnosis.
Right. And the other thing too, I think with joy, that 7th domain, we see sometimes, well, if I can make people smile in a program, then I'm doing my job and that's joy. But joy really only comes when you have those other domains of well-being met, right? True, deep joy. And so I think you can't try to skip to that one without all of the others. Does that make sense to you, Mary Beth? And
really well said. Good point.
Yep. One of the things that when you ask the question, how can we put this in action? I just want to highlight is that we need to be asking people living with dementia what they need to live well, not make those assumptions. And what brings joy to Mary Beth or joy to me or what we need for security, growth, or any of those domains is going to be different. There might be some similarities, but it's the nuances of who we are that we need to keep in mind. So as care partners, we need to constantly check in. Here's the other reality that we often forget. We as humans, we're constantly evolving and changing. Our circumstances change. So that's why we need to continuously check in too, not just one and done.
And Jessica, give a little example of, right now we're having a wonderful conversation with Mary Beth and we can ask her these things. But there are times in various dementia journeys that people can no longer tell us verbally what they need. What are those tips that a family caregiver, a care partner in a senior living community that help still get at all of those domains without having to have a spoken sentence?
I think when we deeply know someone, we can tell what would help and what would erode it. And I think part of what we need to remember is that our body language, our tone and voice, not just the words, can give indication of what's helpful to me. I often share the example of my day center experience. We had a client by the name of Pauline, and she didn't verbalize a lot of words, but she hummed. And what we quickly learned over time is that when she was fearful, when things weren't feeling safe for her, her tone would go up, the vibrato would go quicker, and she would show us through her body language that she was not feeling safe. And then she would also tell us with her big facial expressions, with her laugh, with her smile, when she was feeling really good. So observation is something that I would say we need to do better at, sitting back, observing, and reading the person.
Yeah. So, when you're saying that, Jessica, I was really thinking about how the very prevalent model, the biomedical model, doesn't teach us things like that, right? It says, here are the phases and the stages that everyone will go through, and here's what physically happens to the brain and all of those focus areas. So, and both are important, right? There are biomedical conversations that can be helpful, but how do you make space for both and not just leave it at that one that is really kind of limiting?
Yeah, I agree with you, Jill. There's room for both approaches. The biomedical model is important for understanding the diseases and conditions which cause dementia. But like you said, it misses viewing the person as a whole and identifying what they need to live each and every day really well. So what we can do to make room is first education, right? To understand the medical treatment, the role is to help detect and treat illness and injuries, but there's a danger with it, a potential danger to just look at what's wrong with the person instead of what's right. What are their strengths? What are their abilities? What makes them unique and simply human? Because when we fail to do that, we put people into boxes. If I could just add, one other thing is to balance the biomedical definition with a new definition of dementia that really focuses on the experience of people living with dementia. Like Richard Taylor said, if you know one person living with dementia, you know one. So Jill, even if you and I both got diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, how it plays out for you, how it plays out for me is going to be different. So that new definition is an experiential definition. Our good friend, Dr. Al Power, says dementia is the shift in the way a person experiences the world around them. That definition helps us look at what's happening from that person's perspective, the true expert. It also recognizes that every one of us is going to be different, including people living with dementia.
And Mary Beth, you probably experienced this right when you got your diagnosis. And you even mentioned you were told the diagnosis, go get your affair in order. There's nothing we can do.
Yeah.
You've had to be on the front lines of advocating for, I'm a person, consider me as a whole person. Can you share a little bit about your experience with that and what you shared with your doctor to kind of help them shift from biomedical to understanding you're a whole person?
Well, I fired my first doctor. So that was a big start because it got me to be more independent. And I didn't like what the narrative was. So it was hard because I was definitely implanted in this whole biomedical help. And people didn't really look at me as a person. And so it took a lot of advocacy work on myself and my partner. And we just always had to have it at the forefront. We still do.
Yeah, that's so true. So true. I mean, it really is family members, care partners, everyone advocating for really to shift it. We all have to understand a whole person approach and making sure the biomedical's in there as well. And my own experience with my mother-in-law going through her journey with dementia is how often, and she ended up in 3 different care communities, and one of them was fabulous and really got it. The other one, I tried to explain who she was, and they just reminded me to put her name in the tag of her shirt and bring her telephone. It was very institutional. So I think that's a lot of work that we have to do right now in this country, well, throughout the world, really. It's really shifting from really checking the task list of what it's like to support somebody living with dementia and really looking at it as a whole person and that personal care plan. Even if you're not in a senior living community, you're supporting somebody at home, understanding and doing that work to know them well.
Yeah.
Okay.
I agree, Pam. And that holistic view of that person and also adopting that well-being approach is going to help. As care partners, it could be as simple as adopting the 7 domains and adding questions into our assessment tools that move us away from just looking at people through, they need this help, that help, they have this change, right? It's looking at what do they need for meaning, growth, all of that really important stuff. It could be about huddles, having team huddles and saying, hey, what do you think is helpful for Mary Beth? What's getting in the way of her experiencing well-being? What do we need to do differently?
Just going back to how does a person with dementia communicate to you when the words are lessened? Look in their eyes. Our eyes, the old saying, the eyes are the window to the soul.
So true.
Just by looking into someone's eyes, whether they're blank or they're sparkling. My mom's eyes she had Alzheimer's, used to sparkle when she felt joy. She wasn't speaking anymore. Every once in a while, her eyes would sparkle, and it was just awesome to see this.
Yes, absolutely.
That is awesome.
And I think a little bit about in our community, some of just like little language changes, like we said, nurses and no fault of nurses and our care partners, but because this is what we've been taught, but charting things like Pam refused whatever it is today. Pam refused breakfast. That sends that whole message that Pam doesn't have the right to make decisions about her own life. And when you switch to Pam chose not to have breakfast this morning, that changes everything. It's such a simple little thing, that and not framing people as having behaviors, right? That if, we're sitting in a room right here, and if somebody came and locked the door right now, I'm going to be knocking on that door trying to get out, and I would be having behaviors. But really, it's just I've got an unmet need that I'm trying to get resolved. And so just those little language things, do you see that happening, Mary Beth and Jessica, that can make a difference?
Mary Beth?
Language is everything, I think it just simply sets the tone, and just as an example that you gave, just that one or two things, or, Pam refused her cold cereal or her cold breakfast today. That extra little word cold when it was supposed to be hot can tell a lot. So yeah, language is absolutely important, and it will influence how the interactions go on during the day.
Yeah, it really does shape how we view someone and then how we interact with that person. And so words do have power.
And I remember it just reminds me of a situation. It was our first adult day program we used to have over at a church. And there was a woman there who became agitated every afternoon. So the team there, instead of saying she becomes agitated every afternoon, they dug a little deeper, talked to her family, and understood her previous responsibilities in the afternoon. She was responsible for getting the children from the bus stop and getting the home ready for somebody to come home. So because they did that detective work, they understood what her unmet need was. She needed to prepare the home. She was used to doing that. And so she prepared the adult day program, the space every day in the afternoon. And it made her happy. It made everyone around her happy. But it was that little bit of detective work too. So I think that's really important. And the whole getting to know somebody and being well known. If you really truly know somebody, then you're going to be better off in supporting them living well with dementia.
Yeah.
And with families too, right? Families, if the person can't speak for themselves, families can help us understand too, right? And friends. So.
And not to blame dementia as the reason too. I love your point about doing that detective work and finding out what are the factors that are impacting that person to express themselves in that certain way. I think the other thing that we often miss is that we tend to focus on the negative human expressions and areas of need, but we have a full range of expressions. So what are we doing to support that as well? And that's the other thing that we should be also looking at.
Yes, absolutely. Mary Beth, do you have any last words of advice for people out there listening today?
Well, I think it's important to remember that a person living with dementia, it's not all about the cure for us. I think scientists have kind of taken that on back in that biomedical model. We're very much focused in on today and trying to live the best day that we can. And the fact of it is we're doing that. I mean, there's people all around the world who are living really well with dementia. So it can be done. And part of that is that cognizant of staying focused on the positive and moving that negative aside.
Thank you. Those are some good words of wisdom for all of us, Mary Beth. Thank you. And we are at time, unfortunately. I wish we could have talked for hours longer, but I really want to thank you, Mary Beth, and thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Pam, for being here today and sharing your insights and your stories. I think that this will make an impact for people who are joining us, either listening or watching this podcast today. We will put a link to Mary Beth's book and Jessica's resource list in our podcast notes. And I want to thank everybody for joining us here today for Aging Unscripted. It's a reminder that aging is indeed unscripted. We all have our own journeys that are as individual as we are, and there's no rules. And aging, we have to always remember this too, is not a gift that everyone gets. And elderhood is a sacred phase of life that should be honored and celebrated. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.